research is questioning and disagreeing. I'm Mayla Boguslav, and I study research. I ask questions such as, what is research? How do we measure its success? I live by the motto, ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn. Researchers live in the ignorance or the unknowns. They ask questions, identify areas of ignorance, lead the way to gain knowledge, and most importantly, ask the next questions about our new ignorances. Welcome to the Ignorance Podcast, where we learn about research through research questions. Let's welcome our guest researcher for today. Please introduce yourself by name only and your favorite thing to do outside of work.
I'm Wade Troxell, and glad to be here today.
And what's your favorite thing to do outside of work?
My favorite thing outside of work, I think it's either community related, it's family related, or it's activity related in some way. So I enjoy being engaged in the community in various ways, not just university community, but the community I live in and other communities and interacting and clearly my family is an important part of that. And I like to be engaged and active in one way or another, whether it's bike riding or in a discussion about one thing or another.
What is it about those activities that get you out of work?
Well, for me, it doesn't get me out of work. It is my work. The things that I do are really dependent upon engagement in the community with individuals or in activities. So, I'm a firm believer in increasing chances. Oftentimes, we think we're doing our work when we're in our lab or in our office or in the classroom, but really our work is oftentimes accelerated and impactful when it's in the community and in conversations and not the traditional communities that we might define by a discipline, but those that really spur the curiosity and the kind of questions we're interested in.
Do you have an example of something in the community that has spurred a question?
Sure. Just the other day, I went to an expo in another town, and I had a purpose for being there, had a meeting and so forth. But in walking around and talking with people and by being engaged, you see people that you know and so forth, and it inevitably it leads to a definite project. But a lot of what I do, you can increase your chances of serendipity by just being engaged in the community that leads to specific projects. So I line up senior projects with industry. And so, and in this case, I met a person that is leading to a project that will probably start in January.
Nice. It's really exciting. And when you say senior project, you mean a senior student project from undergrad, correct?
Senior student projects and oftentimes these lead to research projects too, because you're doing specific things that you can cite and demonstrate.
I guess that leads me perfectly to my first question of what questions excite you in your work? What questions are you currently pursuing?
I'm interested in systems and systems of systems. And with that, it's the interconnectedness of a number of things. I think oftentimes in our work and academia particularly, we isolate and we narrow and we try to control the environment to the point where oftentimes we simplify the dynamic interactions between things. And so I've always been interested in how things connect beyond just the physical phenomena, if you will. And I find myself in this related to design. It's really creating things, synthesizing solutions. And I find myself asking a question, when does a research project often become a design project? If we're really intentional about outcomes and what we're trying to do, we end up problem solving. Well, that's more of a design context than a research context. If we're interested in novelty or creativity, that's oftentimes more design related than it is scientific research related. Doesn't mean there can't be questions that we're trying to ask in terms of exploring what is and why something happens, but design oftentimes focuses on what can be and how to. So I'm interested in design And design is synthesis, and synthesis is to the benefit of some fulfillment of some need or want and so forth. And I approach it from a systems perspective. What does that mean? Oftentimes we need different kinds of frameworks to operate in order to create solutions that are beneficial in terms of an outcome. And so that's more of a design related, if you will, than a scientific research perspective.
Interesting. Do you have an answer to when does a research question become a design? And can you give a concrete example of a research question and then how it became a design and trying to narrow in on that break point when it shifted?
Sure. I've interacted some with our ag sciences, and they've been collecting questions, and oftentimes they try to form them in terms of research questions. To cite an example of a problem, there's 10,000 tons of bovine hair waste produced in a single Texas tannery that goes to landfills. Well, is that a research project? What's the opportunity? Oftentimes it's more of a design to utilize to a benefit to synthesize an outcome, as opposed to researching further. It's less about a scientific discovery of why, and more in terms of creation of a solution, which is more of a design synthesis problem.
So just to clarify, there's 10,000 tons of cow hair in trash every year. That's crazy.
Yeah, and so it's viewed as a waste. So how it can be turned into a resource in some way, and that's more of a design question than it is a research question. That doesn't mean there aren't questions to be answered. In fact, the paradox of design is it's an ill-formed problem, and part of designing is creation of the scaffolding for solving the problem in order to address the real need. And so, that's what design is really one of exploration of building solutions towards an outcome.
So do you have an idea of what that outcome will be in that case yet?
Well, if you start with a predetermined outcome, it's not a design problem. And oftentimes we jump to solutions without understanding the real problem to be solved. And there's literature that demonstrates that, well over 90% of initial attempts are really due to lack of understanding what is the real problem and not understanding the problem to be solved. So I reflect upon Einstein's statement: if he had to solve the most vexing problem in the world and he had 1 hour to do it, he would spend the first 55 minutes understanding the problem to be solved and only 5 minutes solving it. It's human nature, I think, to jump to answers instead of understanding the problem. That's where I think oftentimes in a research environment, when they're working towards a solution, there's working to a predetermined outcome in terms of what the solution might be, rather than to actually go through a definite process that takes an ill-formed, ill-defined kind of issue, a need, and map it into alternatives and solutions. It's a process to determine and to test and to evaluate through a design synthesis approach.
Mm-hmm. This idea of staying in the problem always sits with me a lot. Being a math major in undergrad, I definitely learned that the hard way, where, 50% of any math question is just understanding the problem. And then you're like, okay, now I get it. Let me just see what it means from there. And then ideally it gets you closer to the solution. So I definitely agree with you on sitting in the problem longer. And even in team science, we also think about that a lot too. If you don't really understand what you're trying to do, how are you supposed to get started? And so we really encourage teams to sit in the problem longer before they just jump to that solution, as you're exactly saying.
And that's where, like in a team environment, you really want a variety of inputs that really can make connections to things that typically aren't involved in the conversation, that can lead to fruitful outcomes because of these novel connections. So that's more of a design process where you're synthesizing amongst what might be disparate information to get to a viable outcome. And evaluating along the way, prototyping, testing, and so forth is important in that process as well. It's not the smartest person or the loudest person, but it's really this integration of a lot of different perspectives that can get to viable solutions.
Hmm. So, with all of that, how do you hope to impact the world?
This is where I think it's one person at a time. It's through colleagues and students and that sort of thing. And I often think it's not the primary measurement that you're trying to look for, whether it's in publications or so forth, but it's in the secondary effects is when it changes the way of thinking of an individual that then helps them lead to these productive outcomes that may not be directly related to me or someone else, but it's really a process that leads to these outcomes ultimately.
Hmm. Do you have an example of a colleague or a student who you've really influenced and impact the world in that way?
Yeah, just this past week, I advised a number of student projects on design projects. It's a project where senior engineering students working with a nonverbal individual, and his name's Lamar for Make-A-Wish Foundation. It's fulfilling Lamar's wish, and Lamar is interested in lights and action and gets excited when these things happen. So the students are designing a mechanism or something that really helps to delight Lamar. And the students were approaching it in very much of engineering terms, where they're talking in terms of lights and turning things on and off and having Lamar do something with his limited mobility and activity. And what they really lacked, and that this was the exciting part, I think, in my interacting with them, is really to reframe that in a way that they need to zoom out in order to better understand the specifics of what they're trying to do when they zoom in. So in this case of zooming out, they weren't thinking in a systems perspective of Lamar as the agent in their design. They were thinking of Lamar as a bolt-on in what they would be producing. Basically, they weren't engaging the central agency of Lamar. So talking about task in terms of the task they're trying to do is just a component of the system. They also need to think about the environment they find Lamar in terms of his parents and his wheelchair and those that interact with him, his siblings and so forth. And so the central part of their design should really be how to delight Lamar in the task and the environment. So instead of just thinking about the thing that they're trying to design, it's really thinking about Lamar and his agency in this world that they're trying to create. In fact, in reframing it in that way, they could think of a virtual reality kind of environment where it's through Lamar's actions, he kind of creates the activity in which he finds himself. You could picture Lamar playing drums and through his arm actions and that sort of thing is creating music and creating, if you will, a language that speaks to Lamar rather than trying to impose from the outside this thing that Lamar has to interact with. That's very much toys and TV, as opposed to really thinking about the agency of Lamar at the core and delighting in his world. So in that conversation with the students, you could actually see where the lights came on, where they were challenged from their perspective and thinking about it from a different perspective, such that it opened up the possibility of solutions in a way that enabled them to really come into their understanding of the problem in a totally different fashion than shooting from the hip, as we often do when we first are, have a need or a want that we're trying to solve. So it's much different than hypothesis driven reductionism to synthesis based design that enables outcomes that can really solve problems.
Hmm. That's an amazing impact. Kind of a few different impacts. One on the students, really understanding what it means to think in a systems way and design something that's really for a person in that case. And then also, I'm sure you're about to have an impact on Lamar, right? Like, I'm sure Lamar is also going to have a great time once this gets designed. So I can only imagine how many students over the years you've really impacted and what they've gone on to do that now really impacts so many other people's lives. And so I love asking the next question because you just told me how you really impact the world. Now I want to know who has influenced you, who are people you look up to.
You know, um, I think about a lot of the leaders that I have personally known in the past, whether they're in the community or at the university or somebody I've interacted with professionally. It's usually certain traits that have stuck with me over time. For example, my advisor for both my master's PhD, he would challenge me in certain ways that it would take years, 3, 5, where I finally understood what he was talking about. Or in other ways, interacting with people in situations that may be very frustrating or challenging, but a mentor would actually bring some levity to the moment that actually would lighten the thinking in a way that would allow for a different mindset around it. Or those that might be gruff on the outside but tender-hearted on the inside. It was, you can think of professors or coaches that had this kind of demeanor, but at the end of the day, they had a big heart that was really one of trying to improve you in the situation and push you in certain ways. And so I always love that kind of dichotomy where it isn't always love, but it's also a love with a big heart, but also a kick in the pants. That's coaches and that's certain professors and so forth that help you work beyond the kind of limitations that you would set up for yourselves. And so I can speak to coaches, I can speak to teachers that I had growing up. I can speak to my advisor. I can speak to leaders at the university and leaders in the community that I live that have influenced me in ways that have really led to the kinds of things I ended up doing and the makeup that I am today.
Do you want to share one of those people?
Yeah, okay. One of the things that I've been involved with is an elected position. Growing up, this person, for whatever reason, when I was 14 years old, he was the mayor of my community and reached out to me and made me mayor for a day. I accepted, and part of the mayor for the day that day was he was challenged to a race. And I did the race on behalf of the mayor. It was a public policy and things like that. But what it did was raise my awareness to things in my community that local government does. And 40 some years later, I became the mayor of that community. Did I always have in my mind I would I would be mayor? No. But, I think just that influence of public servants being engaged in a community and how does your community work and your responsibilities and service to your community and the love of community and to make your community better. Um, that person had an impact.
I love how many different types of things you've done with your career in general, from public service to being an academic and all the things in between. So I guess in that, how do you know if you've been successful at your work and as a researcher? What is your evaluation criteria?
I think in everything I do is hopefully making a difference for the better. It's not about betterment of me, it's betterment of the community that I'm serving. And so when I started off talking about system of systems and in your various communities, whether it's your department or your university or whether it's in your broader community or within your company or so forth, daily making a difference can improve people's lives. And that could be a one-on-one with a student that might be having a difficult time and talking with them individually, or that might be in a research project that you're trying to accomplish something. It's really I think fundamentally trying to think about things and make them better, and also challenging oneself as a way to think about those things. So that's where the systems and system of systems is an approach. A lot of things that we do in science often neglects the human element, and particularly in human and technology, and now with AI. And now it's even more so that we begin to understand these dynamic interactions between things, and not try to isolate them in some sort of petri dish.
Could you ballpark how many maybe systems have you influenced, and maybe how many people do you think you've influenced?
I have no idea. My measuring stick on that earlier question was through secondary effects. You have a discussion with somebody, but you don't know how that went on to either change something positively. Hopefully, we use the word pay it forward and do that sort of thing. But there's these magnifying effects through these interactions, hopefully for the better.
I like this criteria of better. A question I would ask is, who gets to decide what's better? Is that you thinking about what's better, or is it getting at your secondary effects point? Is it the person you're talking to potentially, or the system you're interacting with?
Right. Well, there's an important aspect of being grounded in what is objective truth and not just relative. So I think there's a lot to be said about the study of the classics, and what's virtue and what's truth. Particularly, I find in science advocacy, it's not about truth necessarily. It's trying to push an outcome, and I think that's something that we need to guard against. Uh, um, you look for some foundational objective truth in order to base what it is we're trying to do. And, virtue and goodness and those sorts of things are timeless, I believe, but, that should be foundational to what it is that we pursue.
So interesting to think about what better means in this idea of truth. Definitely food for thought for me. What has been your most surprising result?
What's a surprising result? As an elected official, as a mayor, I was always taken by the little things that would go on in the community that would delight people. Peter Kageyama in The Love of Cities would talk about the little things, not the monuments, not the grand buildings, but it was really the little things that you would walk around the corner and see something that somebody had done that would just make you stop and pause and say, wow, that's beautiful. So it's goodness in your community, and it's not the big things; it's the little things. It's the personal touches. It's the effort that someone makes to beautify their corner of the world, as small as it might be, and with that, delighting other people in that interaction. When you think about a community and 170,000 people, each doing their own thing and having lives and families and jobs, and at the university doing research and having impact. What are those little things that you can do that can have impact, that can show the love of your community?
Can you give an example both from being the mayor and also from being a researcher?
Yeah. One of the things as mayor, I created this foundation within the city for City Gives. It's like a foundation within the city government. So it creates the ability for community members to give to their community for the betterment of the community. This entity called City Give was really novel from a city perspective, where people could give of property and other sorts of things. It might be for the natural area. We developed a whitewater park within our community and creating a bridge that connected two parts of our community that was through a donation. So the City Give is an example of a way that can impact communities that live beyond just this generation and so forth. I think that was a neat mechanism to enable the giving and the recognition of those donative gifts. Before, if somebody gave a $10,000 check to the city, it just went into general fund and wasn't recognized. But this created a framework that can recognize the impact and traceability and of benefit to the community.
That's amazing. Can you give one in research, like a little thing that you did that surprised you how much impact it could really have in the research community?
I'll talk about some of these design projects. There's a good design element in it, so that fulfills that aspect. But oftentimes you see the students grow, and we do the projects with partners outside the university. So the impacts on those partners, oftentimes companies, where companies are now using these projects more than they would be internships and that sort of thing, because they're actually engaged with the students for 9 months on a project in a way that they can evaluate and so forth. So just this week, I was down in another community and visiting some companies, and visited two students that were on this a senior design project the year previously, now working full time for this company, and very thankful. They found this opportunity in a way that it wasn't through traditional job searching and that sort of thing, but it was through their course that they had to do, but it was in partnership with this company, and this company ended up hiring them. So, I mean, you create these benefits that there's a win-win-win for all sides involved.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am currently working on team science evaluation, and something I've thought a lot about is this idea of win-win. That a lot of our evaluations are surveys, especially when it comes to things that are a little bit more subjective or qualitative in nature. And so we do a survey, we get the results as the researchers, but what does that actually give to the people taking the survey? A lot of times we don't get results back in time. It's kind of an aggregate anyway. So what does it really tell you? And so to me, that's not as win-win. And it's also static, one time point. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we make things win-win. Ideally, we need to be teaching people how to self-evaluate and how to go through it. Then from the researcher's side, you can also see, how do I help this person that now understands what they may really need? So I totally agree with you on win-win. And eventually, my goal is to write a book about the power of rubrics, the art of self-evaluation, because I don't think we understand that. When I was teaching as a postdoc, where I met you, the biggest feedback I got was that my grading was arbitrary. No one ever taught me necessarily how to grade. And I asked some faculty about it that I knew, and they said to me, it just takes time, right? You have to understand every possible error that could happen. In my case, I was teaching in math, and I was like, that's really hard to do. There's so many different ways that people end up that you just can't enumerate all of them. And so to me, that was not a satisfying answer. But how to move through that is an interesting question.
I love it. And what you're doing is being very intentional about all sides. There's a benefit, and that's zooming out and understanding more from a system in order to zoom in to have the kind of impact that creates the win-win-win.
I'm glad you understood that surprise, right? That's led you to such great things too. The other side of this coin is, what is your favorite disagreement?
I think disagreements can open the door to greater understanding or curiosity or so forth, because whether it was in the community or whether it's a colleague or whether it's a student, it's really trying to understand where they're coming from. I may not agree with it, but to understand that framework. Like at the city, if there are 100 people wanting to speak to the mayor and city council, there would be always 100 viewpoints. And your responsibility is to be a representative for all your community with all these different viewpoints. And all you can do is the best you can do. But a lot of times it's really understanding these perspectives and the dynamic between those perspectives. So I think for me, disagreement is one of opening up curiosity and perspective. But I think then, having that objective truth and grounding in what's best for your community, you can't ignore that either.
Do you have an example of one that's really pushed you to learn new perspectives or kind of really changed how you thought about something?
Yeah, there were some issues that I didn't care for at all, like legalization of marijuana, for example. I don't think that's good for our community, but you have to deal with it because of certain things that are beyond what you can do at that level of government. So you try to still influence it, but uh, it's been 10 plus years since those decisions have been made. And I am even stronger in believing that it's not good for our society.
If you could do anything, not limited by grants or other factors in your space, what would you be doing? What is your vision for the world?
Well, if I could be doing anything, I think it'd be doing what I am doing. because I think being a faculty member is an incredible opportunity to do a lot of different sorts of things. And because of that, I've been an elected official. I've started companies with students, former students, and I continue to work with students in various ways, work with colleagues, still involved in the community, whether it be at the university or in my hometown and so forth. It might seem Pollyannish, but I don't think I would change the situation. But I think whatever you're doing, you have the ability to have impact and to influence others.
Yeah, you're the third guest actually to say, I love what I'm doing. And it's really fascinating to hear that you are actually really happy. I think that's sadly semi-unique, that not everyone gets that opportunity to really love what they're doing.
Yeah.
I love asking this question to both understand maybe you love what you do and that's amazing and how can we all get there? And also from the perspective of maybe there's certain things you want to change and how can we help you get there too? So it's really awesome to hear that you love what you do, and just the amount of impact you have on the world, whether it's students, companies, community members, is just really, really amazing. And so with that, I'll ask you to introduce yourself with your job title and field, and say your name one more time, please, and anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I'm Wade Troxell. I'm on the faculty in mechanical engineering, also systems engineering, and also biomedical and chemical engineering here at Colorado State University, and involved with other departments, our master program of public policy administration. And I'm the recent past mayor of the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, a community of 170,000 people, fourth largest city in Colorado, and just a wonderful place to live. It's my hometown, so I grew up here, went to Colorado State University for my 3 degrees, and been able to serve this community and also started companies in the private sector. So hopefully impact my communities in positive ways.
My biggest takeaway is the importance of the little things that can delight people. Wade thinks in systems or systems of systems in order to make the world a better place. For example, Wade helped his students zoom out to remember Lamar's goal of delighting him, giving him agency. Remembering the human and looking at a problem from many different perspectives can lead to new possibilities for solutions. I actually have 2 questions to leave you with. What is a new perspective you can take on something in your life? And what is one small thing you can do to make someone smile? This podcast is hosted by me, Mayla Boguslav, and produced and edited by Joshua Mendel. To learn more about this episode's guest and any cited or named people, take a look at the episode description. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ignorance Podcast. Please follow the Ignorance Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to learn about science through research questions.